Okay, so today we're working on activity 4 and activity 5 from module 2, topic 1, lesson 1. It's all relative. We're going to be looking at the ratios, distinguishing between part and part to whole ratios, using ratio language to understand what we're looking at. So here in activity 4, it's making sense of ratios. In this activity, you will represent ratios in different ways. We're going to be looking for and making use of structure. We're going to be looking for and express regularity in repeated reasoning. So those are the habits of mind that we're going to be looking at while we are doing this lesson. So here it says the Lannerton Middle School is adopting a new nickname. They have narrowed their searches to the following two names: Tigers or Lions. So they're going to be, to choose a nickname, they conducted a school-wide survey and tallied their votes. So tallied basically means to count their votes. So they're going to be looking, they're going to be asking all the sixth graders, and sixth graders would say, I like Tigers or I like Lions. So once they've tallied all their votes, they're going to analyze the results, and this is what they found. In homeroom 6A, the votes for Tigers outnumbered the votes for Lions by a ratio of 240 to 160. So it says Tigers outnumbered Lions. Okay, so Tigers outnumbered Lions. In homeroom 6B, there were 80 more votes for Tigers. So there were 80 more votes for Tigers than the Lions. So this is important to know. So I'm going to go ahead and say that for the Tigers got more votes, right? Because it says the Tigers outnumbered the votes for Lions. And then here it says there were 80 more votes for Tigers than Lions. So I'm going to go ahead and assume that the Tigers are the ones that won here. And then for homeroom 7A, it says the votes for Tigers outnumbered the votes for Lions by a ratio of 3 to 2. So again, the Tigers outnumbered the Lions again. So here I would say the Tigers got the most votes. And then here it says 3 out of 5 votes were for Tigers. So 3 out of 5 votes. I mean, if there were 5 votes and 3 of them were for Tigers, I would say there were more Tiger votes than there were Lion votes, because you got to think 3 out of 5 means that there were 5 total votes and 3 of them were for Tigers, and that means 2 of them were for Lions. So let's take a look and describe the meaning of each. So I just kind of did that a little bit, but we're going to look at to see if these are part-to-part ratios or part-to-whole ratios. So interesting here, it says the vote for Tigers. So for 6A, it says that the votes for Tigers outnumbered the votes for Lions by a ratio of 240 to 160. That means that there were 240 votes for Tigers and 160 votes for Lions. This isn't a part to whole because it's 1 part Tigers, 1 part Lions. If it was part to whole, it would be the total number of votes. So this is actually what we refer to as a part to part ratio. And then for homeroom 6B, Mr. Guest trying something new here writing on this tablet thing. There were 80 more votes for Tigers than Lions. So is this part to whole or part to part? There were 80 more votes for Tigers than Lions. Well, I'm going to come back to that one and go to homeroom 7A, because that's 6B. I don't know. I want to think about the others, and then I'll come back to 6B. The votes for Tigers outnumbered votes for Lions by a ratio of 3 to 2. Again, even though the ratio looks a little different than it did for 6A, it's saying that Tiger votes to Lion votes 3 to 2. And I noticed that it's using the word to in both of these situations. So that would be a part to part. Okay. Now 7B, uses different words. It says 3 instead of the word 2, it says out of. 3 out of 5 votes were for tigers. So if there were 3 votes out of 5, this 5 means that there were a total of 5 votes. So this is actually what we call a part to whole ratio, part to whole ratio, because it's telling you that there were a total of 5 votes and 3 of them were for tigers. So it's tigers to total. That's that ratio. Now 6B, there were 80 more votes for tigers than lions. 80 more votes for tigers than lions. So I would say to figure this out, I would need to know the whole, right? So for me to know how many votes there were for lions, I would need to know the total, right? Or would I need to know the lions part? 80 more votes for tigers than lions. If I knew how many votes there were for lions, I would just add 80 and know the number for tigers. So I would say this is part to part. If you disagree with me, please come to class and explain to me why you think this might be a part to whole ratio. All right, moving on to page 177, activity 4, continued. It says, let's consider the results reports by homeroom 7A. The votes for tigers outnumbered the votes for lions by a ratio of 3 to 2. So that we said was a part-to-part ratio because it's lion or tigers votes, 3 tiger votes to 2 lion votes. This comparison is an example of a part-to-part ratio expressed in words. There are 2 other ways you can express this part-to-part ratio. You could use a colon. So this right here is a colon. This 2 dots like this, called a colon. And what you would typically do, you would use all of the words to explain what the number represents in a ratio. So you wouldn't just say 3:2. You would say, well, it's 3 votes for tigers to 2 votes for lions. This colon right here kind of replaces the word 2 in your ratio. So this replaces the word 2. And then you can also write it in fractional form. And notice that we do include the words here as well. And instead of the word 2 and instead of a colon, we actually have a fraction bar here. So we put the fraction bar in the middle. That was not a straight line. Either way, and the fraction bar is what replaces the word 2 here. So the first part of the ratio goes on top, and the second part of the ratio goes on the bottom, which is really cool. So if we wanted to look at 7B, homeroom 7B, here next let's consider the results for students' votes as reported by homeroom 7B, that 3 out of 5 votes were for tiger. Remember, this was a part to whole ratio. So that means, but we want to think of it. If there were 3 votes for tigers, that means that there were how many votes for lions? There were 2 votes for lions. So there were 3 votes for tigers, 3 for tigers, and there would be 2 for lions. Okay. So we could do, this is part to whole, this is 3 parts tigers, this is your total number of votes. So if there were 3 for tigers, there would have to be 2 for lions. So your part to part would be 3 tigers, 3 votes for tigers to 2 votes for lions, which is the same thing from 7A, which is weird. All right, so in words, we would have how many votes for tigers? Well, there are 3, so we can replace this with 3 for every 2 votes for lions. With a colon, we would write this exact same thing up here. And it's going to be really hard for me to write this in this tiny little box, but we're going to do our best, okay? So 3 votes for tigers, okay? And then we're going to put a colon, and then we're going to write 2 votes for lions. boy, this is a really learning curve here for Miss Okay. And then for fractional form, we would just write 3 votes for tigers, votes for tigers on the top, and then draw the fraction bar, and then put lions on the bottom. 2 votes for lions. This is really crooked, but y'all are, you know, you guys, oh, you could reverse it. 2 votes for lions for every 3 votes for tiger. Because remember, with ratios, order matters. Like, you have to write it in the order that they want you to. Because there's a big difference between 3 votes for tigers to 2 votes for lions than there is for 2 votes for lions and 3 votes for tigers. If you said the wrong word here and did tigers, it would mess the whole ratio up. So they want it tigers to lions, you have to write the numbers tigers to lions. If they want it lions to tigers, you have to write the numbers that go with lions first and the numbers that go with tigers second. So I'm not going to write the second one because it's the same as the first, just in reverse. So you would just flip-flop the 2 up here. Here is the same ones that are giving you part to whole ratio. So here you would, let me see if I can't zoom in a little bit for you guys. All right, and then I gotta move it over. Move it over. So here, 3 out of 5 votes were for tigers. So your colon, you would say, you would do it the same way. You would say 3, this would be part to whole though. So you would write 3 votes for tigers, colon, 5 total votes. And in fraction form, you would write 3 votes for tigers on top of 5 total votes. Okay, and then this would, for lions, remember that 2 out of 5. So then you would do it the same way, but instead of 3 votes for tigers as the first one, you would write 2 votes for lions. Oh, and then 5 total votes. And instead of, in the fractional form, instead of writing 3 votes for tigers, you would write 2 votes for lions, and then the fraction bar and 5 total votes. All right, then it says, finally, let's consider the results from the survey as reported in homeroom 6A. It says that, I'm trying to get this to scroll over for you guys. It says that the votes for the tigers outnumbered the votes for the tigers outnumbered the votes for the lions by a ratio of 240 to 160. So they're giving you 240 first. That means tigers because it's the first word in our situation, to 160. 160 goes with lions because it's the second number in the ratio and it's the second word in our situation. It says complete the part to part and part to whole ratios written in words and then write each ratio with a colon and in fraction form. So maybe I like blue. Let me try a different color. I put a blue dot on the paper. All right, so in words, we had how many votes for tigers? We had 240 votes for tigers. 240 votes for tigers, and we had 160 votes for lions. So to write it with a colon, you would write 240 votes for tigers, and you would write, put the colon, colon, don't forget the colon. You would write 160 votes for lions. And in fraction form, you would write 240 votes for tigers on top. Oh, what did it just do? Jumped it up there like that. And then you would write the fraction bar and do 160 votes for lions. A lot of time, just to show you guys this, and when I'm just going to show this without all the words for the second one. So we know here on the bottom one, we're going to reverse it. We want lions to tigers. So when we're trying to do the math and stuff, sometimes the words aren't really necessary, and you can just do the numbers like this. Okay. All right. So part to whole ratio, that's interesting. Because for the tigers, we know that there were 240 tiger votes. So there were 240 votes. Well, that just made a fun mark. Let's get rid of it. Let's get rid of it and go back to my fun blue. So we know that there were 240 tiger votes. And now once out of this right here means we need to find a total. So we need to know how many is total. So you would take the 240 tiger votes and add it to the 160 lion votes, and that equals, well, 60 plus 40 is 100, so this total is 400. 400 total. So with the colon, you could do 240 to 400, part to whole, and then in fraction, you would do 240 over 400. And you can include the words there too. And then for the lions, well, it was 160 out of the 400. And you do one tigers to total, and you can do tigers to total. Well, I think based on the survey, which mascot name did the students prefer? And I think we can all agree it was tigers, which I am the tiger math teacher. Woo. All right, activity 5. So this one right here is just explaining that there are different types of ratios, special ratios actually. And a percent is a special type of ratio. A percent is a part to whole ratio. So the whole always being 100. So the couple of different ways that you say it is there is an 80% chance of rain tomorrow. Diego always gives 110%. Your battery is 50% charged. Joe received a 90% on a 10-question quiz. Each situation describes a special type of ratio called a percent. A percent is a part to whole ratio where the whole is equal to 100. A percent is like another name for hundredths or out of 100. So whenever you are looking at percents, you're always thinking about how much is it out of 100. So there's that word out of that we were using with our part to whole ratios, because the important thing you have to remember is that a percent is a part to whole. And your grades, like whenever you're like trying to figure out your percentage, you're always trying to figure out how many you got right out of the total number of questions, okay? If we're thinking about it as a grid and we think of hundreds or percents as hundredths, then you look at this hundreds grid. So 35% means you have 35 out of 100. So you can shade in 35 squares in the hundreds grid. There is one row of tenths, a second row of tenths, a third row of tenths, and then 5 hundredths, which makes 35 hundredths, or 35 out of 100. So you could take this percent and write it like a fraction, 35 out of 100, which equals 35%, okay? Also, so here are some other examples. I know kind of shaded, kind of funny, but the same concept applies. So here, they're all going to be the whole, the part whole ratio. The whole is going to be 100, okay? All day long, the total is going to be 100. So for all of these, you could go ahead and write the whole part for the part to whole ratio. The whole would be the bottom number. The top number is how many are shaded. So this has 10, 20, 30, 40, 41, 42, 43, 44, 45. So this has 45 shaded squares out of a total 100 squares. This one has 11 shaded squares out of a total 100 squares. Number 3 has 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70 out of 100. And the fourth one is 100 out of 100, because all of them are shaded. So percents are real fun to work with if you understand the fact that a percent is a part to whole ratio, where the whole is always 100. And the percent is always the part out of 100, which is really cool. And so the top number, you would just simply rewrite it. If you wanted to write it as a percent, you find out whatever that number is over 100 and you write it. And then you give it its percent symbol. Okay. So for the 4 down in the bottom, you look at it's over 100. So the number on top is a 45 and you give it its percent symbol. Here, the top number is 11 and it's over 100. So you could easily write this as a percent, 11%. And then 3, it's a number over 100, so it's 70%. And this is the whole thing, 100%. So in class, make sure you have your notes and we will be doing some practice in class.